One thing that I see and hear most often regarding tabletop games are dungeon masters asking for advice on how to get their players invested in their campaigns and world setting. And they'll talk about how much effort they put into the lore, crafting interesting narratives, and all the things they do to tie in player backstory in a major effort to get their players invested and interested in their campaign. And conventionally, this basically is the advice given to get people interested. You're supposed to work in their backstory and provide interesting narratives. But based on how often I see these questions pop up, there has to be something missing. This advice is given so often that by now, decades into the hobby, surely if the advice were truly as effective as how often it gets shared, we'd see this become less of an issue, or at least something relegated to first-time dungeon masters. But it hasn't. If anything, at least to me, it seems like this continues to be the number one thing blocking people's enjoyment of the game. So how can we change this? Well, first let's talk about collaborative world building. First thing, I want to clear up what I think world building is. A lot of people have this idea that real world building is sitting down and writing, crafting up all sorts of interesting details about their world. The various locations, factions, governments, everything. Now, for a literary approach, this might be the way, because the narrative that is crafted from all of these details is purely your own. The way they interact is all strictly from your own imagination. However, I find that this type of approach to world building for tabletop games falters. The thing is, most people who go to great lengths to make these intricate and complex details assume on the basis of their own creativity that when presented to the players, it will be just as interesting and fun for them as it is for the creator. Personally, I don't much enjoy that kind of world building. It's fun at times to hammer out some details of this or that thing, but ultimately I find where I get the most player engagement and the most interesting world building is when I open up the world and allow my players to be a creative voice in its creation. So much of this solo style world building is built on the assumptions that because you find it interesting, that the players will. And I think this is where the overprotectiveness comes into play, and where dungeon masters will keep a tight grip on the details of the world. When world building this way, dungeon masters spend hours and hours crafting all of this material, and so by the time everything is ready to play, it is full of a ton of baked-in assumptions. Dungeon masters assume how the players will respond. They assume the players' opinions of the material, and they assume how they will interact with it. And then when the players don't, when the players choose a different path or come away from an encounter with a vastly different opinion of whatever or whoever it is they've interacted with, the dungeon master panics. They cling onto the part they can control, and through force, they railroad the players or constantly hit them over the head with the proverbial hammer until the players understand. How do we avoid this altogether though? Well, first you have to let go, right? Stop trying to control what you can't control. You can never truly control the players and the things that they choose to interact with. And if you do, the players will know and they will hate it. But here's the truth. When you let go, you don't lose control. You gain collaborators. Good players aren't there just to derail the game. They're there to enrich it. They want to have a good time just as much as you do. Their contributions aren't challenges to your authority. They're gifts of creativity that expand the world in ways that you could never manage alone. By assuming you know what the players want, you back yourself into a corner. You don't have to do this though. Don't enter into a fresh setting in a game with tons of details. Give the players the ability to control their own fate and outcomes. Instead of assuming you know what they will find interesting, give them a blank canvas. You need the surface level details, but allow them to direct you to what they find most interesting. Let them show you what they want to interact with by their actions and their decisions. And when a player proposes something unexpected, resist the urge to micromanage or dismiss it. Instead, ask yourself, how can I make this work? Their ideas become seeds for adventures and encounters that you might not have ever thought to plant. When you say yes, you're not just validating their creativity, you're inviting them into the process of world building. This invitation transforms your game from your world to our world, and players who feel ownership over the setting are far more invested in its fate. The cornerstone of collaborative world building is trust. Trust that your players care about the game. Trust that their ideas come from a place of excitement and not disruption. Trust that even if their contributions feel messy or unpolished at times, you can turn them into something great and exciting for the players to experience. When you trust your players, they rise to the occasion. They bring their A game, not just as participants, but as creators themselves. They'll surprise you with the depth of their ideas, the complexity of their characters and actions, and the way they tie together all the little things that they enjoy the most about the game. When you let go, you gain what everybody wants out of these games in the first place: buy-in. Players care deeply about the world because they help build it. They'll remember the city that they founded, the faction that they created, or whatever other detail they're allowed to come up with. They'll engage with the setting on a level that passive participants simply can't. And when you let go, you also free yourself. No longer burdened with creating every detail, you have more mental bandwidth to focus on adapting to player choices and enjoying the game. You become part of the table's collective creativity. Letting go doesn't mean you stop being the Dungeon Master. You're still the Dungeon Master. Your role just shifts from being the sole creator to curator, synthesizing ideas and ensuring the world remains cohesive. You take the sparks that your players provide and you fan them into flames, weaving their contributions into amazing game moments for everybody to enjoy. This doesn't mean accepting every idea without question. Some suggestions may not fit the tone or structure of the world, but even then, collaboration is key. Instead of just outright saying, that won't work, try, how can we tweak that to fit? Or what if we take this idea in a slightly different direction? This is something I can speak directly to because it was something that I did. I started a community. I have a Discord of about 70 members or so, mostly made up of players that I ran games for, and while it's slowed down recently, all of the details still exist in the server. There are multiple ways to include player ideas into the world, and I personally did a few. The first and easiest is through play. Let the players guide what matters, and whatever they suggest or even offhandedly mention, include into the game and make it part of the setting. Another way I did is I would do a weekly community world building stream. I would come up with a topic for the week and let anybody suggest whatever they wanted. And then at the end of the week, I'd stream and I would go through every single suggestion given and try to make it part of the world as a fun collaborative hangout. A lot of suggestions ended up just kind of being banter, and not every single person in the server participated, but I think those that did had much greater buy-in and engagement with the world. And the ideas that came from it were amazing. All kinds of factions, unique creatures that I could stat out and turn into monsters, as well as more simple things like slang that made for more engaging and fun roleplay. Overall, it was a very fun thing to do, and maybe it'll be something that I bring back or try to revitalize in the future. But for now, let's discuss player buy-in. Because of the overlap in the tabletop hobby with other creative ventures and interests such as writing, I find that a lot of Dungeon Masters feel some extra weight of responsibility when it comes to their creations. For whatever reason, there's an extreme ownership, particularly regarding the setting that they create, but also of the campaign's narrative and details. I think this is because a lot of Dungeon Masters try to use the hobby as a creative fuel for their own interests. A ton of Dungeon Masters seem to think that running a campaign is the base for their creative writing exercises and sure to help with their solo writing project, if not becoming the writing project entirely. This idea, however, stifles creativity and is a big part of why nobody becomes interested in their campaigns. People who approach the game this way tend to have an iron fist around every detail of their campaign, to the point that they railroad their players through narratives and completely brush aside any possible action or idea that the players may have or come up with regarding the world. This is exactly how you push away any and all player interest or investment. I'm not entirely sure when, but at some point within the hobby, the expectation for the Dungeon Master's role became much closer in line with a sort of master of ceremonies, putting on a show for the players to passively consume while occasionally, mostly through their character, making decisions on how to move forward in a sort of choose-your-own-adventure path. I think this was likely influenced through modules and adventure design, but regardless, the result has exacerbated this intense level of control from Dungeon Masters. The reality, though, is that in the earlier days of the hobby, the Dungeon Master was much more like another player at the table, just playing the world rather than a specific character. The campaigns that people ran weren't a story that was predetermined prior to the start of the game, but the resulting narrative that was created by all of the players' decisions at the table. The individual pursuits of the players having major impacts on the setting was part of the collaborative gameplay aspect that I think has been largely lost in conventional play to the detriment of the hobby. If you as a Dungeon Master are only as good as the story that you write, then it stands to reason that a ton of Dungeon Masters are going to have a problem with this. Writing well is tough. Look at all the creative media that gets released every single day. When players come to your table and the expectation is that you are going to weave them an interesting, fun, and engaging tale for 4+ hours straight, and the only thing that they have to do is talk in character sometimes, the level of skill you have to be at to truly grab everybody's attention is next level. And even then, it has to be in line with the interest of everybody at the table. If I'm not particularly grabbed by your story, then why the hell would I ever spend 4+ hours of my life listening to it with the occasional interjection that doesn't necessarily dictate the terms of the game at all? If this is the expectation of your game, then no wonder you're having such trouble with player investment and buy-in. Remember that this is a game, and originally it is a collaborative game where the players get to make whatever decision that they want, and you have to play out those decisions. Return to that philosophy, and if you have to, find new players that are in line with that style of play. Regardless, what do you all think about this? How do you handle world building, and how much, if any, power do you give to your players? Let me know in the comments. Either way, thank you for watching. I'm Trill, and I hope you enjoyed.